Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. Abu Huraira quoted the Prophet ﷺ as saying, 7 will be shaded by Allah Almighty on a day when there will be no other shade besides His shade. A just ruler, a youth who grows up worshipping Allah, a man whose heart is attached to the mosques, 2 men who love each other only for the sake of Allah. They meet on the basis of it, and they separate on the basis of it. A man who is invited to corruption by a woman of high position and beauty, and he replies, "Indeed, I fear Allah." A man who gives charity and hides it so much so that his left hand is unaware of what his right hand gave. And a man who remembers Allah in private, and his eyes become filled with tears. We looked in our previous episode at the just Imam. And we said that when the Imam is just, he will affect the society as a whole. He will institute Allah's laws throughout the realm. So mosques will be readily available, properly built, in such a way that people would be attracted to coming to the mosques. The education would be there for people in the society, so that at all levels of education, they would be receiving Islamic teachings, whether it's primary, secondary, university education, etc. Islamic teachings would be there. Corruption, whether it is in the area of the media, magazines, books, whatever, it would be censored. The just Imam would not allow corruption to spread within the society. So, in such a circumstance, for a young man to grow up worshipping Allah would be much easier, because the whole society now is supporting his growing up worshipping Allah. But in spite of that, being a young man where he goes through certain hormonal, psychological changes, where he wants to assert himself or herself, because we said these categories are not limited to males. A young woman or a young man want to make decisions for themselves. Hormones are driving them to corruption. And no matter what society is established, it doesn't mean that corruption is totally eliminated. Among the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were those who drank alcohol and were punished for it. There were those who stole and were punished. There were those who committed adultery, and they were executed. So, simply because the society has a general commitment from the top down to the implementation of Islam, it doesn't mean that all sin ends, that the people now become angels. No, we're still human beings with desires, the same desires. This is why the laws of Allah are for all times. They were not set only for the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but for all times, because basic characteristics of human beings don't change. So even though the just Imam would establish such a society, the pressure on young people to grow up worshipping Allah is still there. They do not understand, for example, the implications of some of their actions. They tend to think in the present, what is needed right now, what will gratify my needs at this moment. They tend not to look to the future. Their elders, those around them, are telling them, don't do this, don't do that, stay on the straight path, etc. But desires, their lack of foresight, drives them to disobedience. So Allah gives this category of the young person growing up worshipping Allah a special status. And this is why, we know in society in general, because where we find the just ruler is an exception today. We have to have a just ruler. Most rulers tend to be unjust in one aspect of their rule or another. So the societies tend to have large amounts of corruption. And as such, young people growing up in a society where there's a lot of corruption, the tendency to deviate, especially in that young youth, is greater than at any other time. You know, people tend to wake up in their mid-20s, late 20s, 30s, etc. But in that early stages of the teens, etc., they tend to, you know, deviate. They tend to go astray. So this is the most difficult time. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, with the instruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, designated that young person, male or female, who grows up worshipping Allah as being in a special category on the Day of Judgment. That they would be shaded by the throne of Allah from the heat of the sun, which will be burning everyone else, because of the struggles that they had to go through in youth and growing up worshipping Allah. And as we have mentioned previously, the greater the struggle, the greater the trial, naturally the greater the reward. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in an authentic narration, mentioned that the 2 feet of Adam's descendants would not move on the day of resurrection when they stand before Allah until they're asked about 5 things: the individual's age and how he spent it, how he utilized his life, his youth and how he lived it, his wealth, from where he earned it, and on what he spent it, and what he did with his knowledge. These are all gifts from Allah. We will be asked about each and every one of them. Our lives, how we spent it. Did we end up killing a lot of time in recreation, in play, etc., and left very little time for worshipping Allah? We'll be asked about that time. We talk about spare time. Really, there is no spare time. We talk about holidays, but really there are no holidays, because we cannot take holidays from Islam. We have to be Muslims wherever we may be. We may travel, but there is no holiday in that ultimately. If a person is a conscious Muslim, then they must be conscious throughout the various aspects of their lives. There is no spare time. As Allah said, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. If one is finished from worship, then they should continue to pray. Doing acts of worship, there are no gaps there. Time, we can say, is not important. No. Time is of the essence, and we have to utilize it, and we'll be responsible for it. And our youth and how it was lived. How did we live our youth as youth? How did we follow the instructions which were given to us, or did we deviate from them? So the issue of youth, the fact that a person may go right later on, it doesn't excuse his period of youth. He's still responsible for it. And the youth will determine to a large degree to what degree the person in the latter part of his or her life will be righteous. A person who grows up righteous in youth will be righteous in old age. I mean, they have built themselves a solid foundation. But of course, this righteousness has to be righteousness again from the heart, sincerely. Because if one only has an exterior of righteousness, where one does what the parents have instructed, the society expects, etc., one does it, so apparently they are righteous, but internally their hearts are elsewhere, then of course this is not the person who ends up in the shade of Allah's throne. Because such a person, when he or she is freed from the restrictions of family and society, then their true selves will become apparent. They will act according to their desires. So this is why when we looked at these categories we mentioned earlier, the issue of struggling against desire is a major point. The issue of fearing Allah, that it is really from the fear of Allah, is a critical point. Furthermore, the Prophet ﷺ went on to say his wealth, from where he earned it and how he spent it. That our money, the wealth that we have, is not really ours. We will have to answer for it. Though we may have earned it or inherited it or whatever, it's still not ours. It is only the wealth of Allah, which Allah has put in our trust for a period of time. We came into this world without it. We leave this world without it. We're given it as a trust during our life here, and how we use it will determine whether the wealth is of benefit to us ultimately, or it is harm to us. So we should try to use our wealth as much as possible in a way which is pleasing to Allah. Squandering wealth is something hateful. As Allah said in the Quran, إِنَّ الْمُبَذِّرِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ, those who are squanderers of wealth, they are brethren of the devils. This is an evil way. We should be very judicious in how we apply our wealth. We have responsibilities. It is a test from Allah, not just a blessing. Some people tend to look at it as, oh, Allah has blessed me with all this wealth, alhamdulillah. But this is not the way. We are thankful to Allah by using that wealth according to how Allah has prescribed, using it as a means to gain more and more righteous deeds for ourselves, more blessings for ourselves, not using it just to have a good time, a pleasurable time. So we will be asked about where we got the wealth from and how we spent it. Where we got it, meaning, did we get it from halal means or did we get it from haram means? How we spent it, did we spend it in halal ways or did we spend it in haram ways? The Muslim is conscious of his or her wealth and how they utilize it and from where they get it. And the last category was regarding knowledge, how that knowledge was used. Of course, knowledge is ultimately a gift from Allah. Allah has given us the opportunity and He has made it obligatory through His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who told us talabul ilmi farida ala kulli muslim. Seeking knowledge is compulsory for every Muslim. Of course, this knowledge is primarily knowledge of the religion, to gain that knowledge, as well as knowledge which is needed by the society, what we call fard kifaya, where we need to have certain elements, doctors, lawyers, professionals, engineers, plumbers, taxi drivers, whatever. We need to have these various professions to provide services which the society needs. So, having knowledge to be able to do these, one is also fulfilling an aspect of that obligation. But now, how do we use that knowledge? Do we use it just for ourselves, just to get money, to get a good and comfortable life? Or do we use it to benefit the society as a whole? Knowledge is a tool. It can benefit us or it can harm us. And among the three people who the Prophet ﷺ said would be the first to be thrown in the hellfire was a knowledgeable man, the scholar, who would be asked, what did you do with the knowledge which Allah gave you? And he would reply, I taught for your sake, O Allah, etc., etc., etc. And Allah will say, no, you taught to be praised by people, that people would admire you, and you were admired, you had your reward, and you will be thrown in hell. So the knowledge should be shared and given, passed on to others. One takes benefit from it, but it should be done sincerely, utilized sincerely. We pass it on sincerely to others, and we thank Allah for whatever He has given us of it by applying it to ourselves first and foremost, and then sharing it with others. With that, we come to the end of this segment of our program, In the Shade of the Throne. We'll continue to look at the next category, the man whose heart is attached to the mosques, in our coming episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.